So we all know that authors have their own real lives. Does it matter to you if that part of them affects their work? Or do you want to just read their book? Let's talk. Hello, everybody. My name is Rob. This is my mom, Karen. And on today's episode, we're going to talk about whether or not the real life of various authors or writers has any effect on their work, or more specifically, does that part of them matter to you as the reader? So, as I started off at the beginning, every author obviously has their own real life, whether it's positive, negative, or maybe just something neutral. There's always something that will affect what they write about, because just generally, as a human, when you do something, what you know will kind of trigger what you do because that's what you grew up with. That's what you saw, right? You and I have talked about this on many different aspects of things because of what we've seen or what we haven't seen.
Right.
It kind of plays into what we.
It colors how we see things.
Exactly, yeah. So it could be their cultural background, could be personal experience, could be their beliefs or their values. But whatever it is, authors will use what they experience for the most part in their work, even if it's inadvertently. So, for instance, people like Tolkien, who experienced war, he was in World War One. People who have experienced trauma or loss, let's say that they're, loss of a family member or maybe a loss of a kid. All of that stuff will play into it, even if it's not necessarily on the top of their mind, because it shaped them as an individual. And I always bring up Tolkien because he's kind of the epitome of what it means to write but also live at the same time, because he legitimately was in a period of time where all of this stuff was going on. There was the war going on, there was the different sides, all of that. People like A. Milne, who wrote the Winnie the Pooh stories, he actually suffered a lot as well. And unless you've actually read about his biography, you wouldn't know. But when you learn what he went through, a lot of his Winnie the Pooh stuff kind of makes more sense, right? Because it talks a lot about what it means to grow up, what it means to
Right.
have your kid, go off and do something and not be a kid anymore, right?
Right.
But on the flip side, and I think you'll agree for books like nonfiction, not everything that they do will be put into their book. So maybe they're just flat out writing a book on, like, let's say writing a cookbook or whatever.
Right.
It's just generally their choice of food written in a cookbook, right? For me, cookbooks are interesting because while a lot of them may be writing recipes that they grew up with, it's probably more so just what they know. It's probably more so what they've been cooking. So it's not really a emphasis on what they did. It's more an emphasis of just what they know, what they studied, right? So
Right.
somebody like Rachel Ray, who is of Italian background, all of her books focus a lot on Italian food because that's what she does. That's what she cooks is Italian, right? So I'll ask you really quick. Do you think there's maybe a medium of partially life, partially not life, or do you think it's either one or the other, no matter what, when it comes to
I
a
think
book?
I don't think there's anything one way or the other. I think it's partial. It's both. It's both things. In a fiction book, let's say somebody's writing romantic fiction, they may take from their own life in terms of how they
True.
create the characters. I have a friend who wrote a book about the empty nest. And she
Okay.
herself has an empty nest. And the reason why she wrote the book is that she was experiencing the empty nest and decided to write a book around it. So yeah, I think maybe there's some stuff in a fiction book where you might take a romantic fiction where you've gone through a divorce and now you're starting your life all over again, and this book then comes out.
Right.
In a nonfiction book, I think of books that I've read in the past. Dr. John Deloney, he's a psychologist, and he has a podcast, and he talks about all sorts of things. But he talks about himself in it as well. And the reason why he wrote the book, and so this is a nonfiction book with very specific ideas on how to, get be a better, maybe more mentally okay. I don't know how to put that any other way. But he uses himself as the example. So I think yes, and maybe no sometimes. I think it depends on.
Well, it's actually interesting the way you put that because it feels like some subject matters you can't not put yourself because, like you said, as his job, that's what he did, and So I think in a way, depending on who you are, or I'm sorry, what you're writing about, it would be impossible to not put yourself in due to the subject matter at hand. But like for instance, going back to Tolkien, who wrote the Lord of the Rings, unless you are into critiquing how a book is written, you may not believe that a fantasy and a war are the same. But when you learn, for those who have read about Tolkien, when you learn that he was in the war, you learn quickly Lord of the Rings is World War One, but in a fantasy world. And it's very interesting to think about that way because when you look at a fantasy book or a science fiction book, you're supposed to, quote unquote, just pretend like it's all made up and looking at it. But it's hard to look at it made up when
Right.
you realize it's very, very similar. So that's the part to me that's very interesting. And nonfiction, you're right, I get it. Obviously, it's nonfiction, it's going to be based on true stories. But a fiction, I always grew up being taught by teachers, it's really all made up. There's no rhyme or reason. And it wasn't until college ish where you started learning about the people
Right.
behind the book and you go, okay, well, would this book have been so good had he or she not done X,
Right.
Y, or Z?
Can you think of a book where knowing about the author's life changed how you understood the actual
Um,
story?
I would say in this, a lot of authors had some very unfortunate situations, and people like Hemingway or Poe, who we learn were alcoholics and had some depression issues. When you learn that their lives weren't very happy, and the things they were writing about were dark, kind
Mm.
of for a reason, I guess.
Yeah.
You kind of start to go, okay, I don't know if it necessarily makes the book or the poem or whatever any better or worse, but it definitely, for me at least, it shapes the vision. And my favorite one I always go back to is Dante's Inferno, who was actually exiled because his book basically called out all of the government and all of the priests
Right.
at the time. And that was his way of basically trying to say, this is what's happening in my country right now. When you find out what these people were actually doing or thinking, it does play into, do I want to read more? Do I want to learn more? Do I want to go into the real life over the fiction? Because there's a lot of things that you miss in the story if you don't know why that individual,
Right.
and it's kind of like going into another category of art, it's like the Van Gogh thing. Until you know who Van Gogh was, none of his paintings will actually make much sense until you realize his psyche, right? So there's a whole lot of
Context.
missing pieces.
Yeah, and the
It's
context.
like a jigsaw puzzle.
So then the question, the obvious is that should readers then, is it incumbent on a reader to consider the author's background as they're interpreting their work, or should
That's a
we just
good,
read the book and call it a day?
I think it's a good question. I think we've kind of talked about it, how you and I read differently. Um, I'll pick a book because of, I don't know, maybe a topic or a specific whatever. A lot of it is nonfiction, so I kind of have to know the person's background to understand why they're discussing what they are. Um, but for me, in terms of reading, I don't know if I necessarily need the background per se, but I think what happens is the more you read an author, the more you start to go, why is this theme continuously coming back? And that's where you kind of have to go, do I want to learn more, or do I want to just enjoy this person's book and just read it for the hell of, so that's a good question. I don't know. I mean, I think it's one of those questions the reader themselves will have to pick, but I think you end up having to do it anyway because you're that interested in the story.
Good
I
point.
don't know.
Yeah, no,
Yeah.
it's a good point. And so for all of our viewers, go check out the Next Chapter Bookstore.shop because there's fiction and nonfiction books in there, all different categories. And I'm curious. I know we're both curious. As you read books, what do you think? Do you think the author intersperses himself into the story, or he doesn't, she doesn't. What do you think? Let us know. Lots of great books there. As we always say, they're gently used. Somebody else experienced them before you did. How cool is that?
I love it.
I do too. I love that too. Well, Rob, as usual, always fun. The rest of you, thank you for joining us today, because you have a choice as to where you spend your time, and you chose to spend it with Rob and I, and we are eternally grateful. Go out, give somebody an awesome day. We'll see you next time. Goodbye, everyone.